Hello, everyone.
My name's Brian, and for most of my life, I figured a good relationship was all about balance and give and take, not who brought home the bigger paycheck. I always believed that as long as there was love, respect, and loyalty, it was more than enough to keep a marriage strong. But I have got to admit, it gets complicated when your wife outearns you by a lot. My wife, Jessica, is one of those women who commands attention the moment she enters a room. At 39, she is a successful corporate lawyer, sharp, determined, and endlessly ambitious. Jessica's career soared in a way mine never did. I work as a graphic designer, and while I am good at what I do, my income just does not come close to hers. She makes nearly double what I do, and although I was thrilled for her success initially, over time, the imbalance started to wear on me. I tried not to let it get to me, but the truth is, it changed something between us. On paper, we had it all: a nice house in a quiet neighborhood, 2 kids always up to some kind of mischief in the backyard. Our marriage looked solid, like it was built on a foundation as sturdy as any I could design. But if you really looked, you could see the cracks, and they were widening every day. Jessica had always been the adventurous type, both in her career and in her personal life. I admired that about her, maybe even felt a little intimidated by it. A few months ago, while we were having what seemed like a typical Sunday brunch, she casually suggested that we spice things up in the bedroom. She said it with a smile, almost like she was joking. I went along, figuring she was testing the waters, maybe curious to see how open I was to trying something new. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. Swirling the last bit of her mimosa, she said, "You know, I think black men are incredibly attractive. They have this natural charisma, like they were just born to lead. Ever thought about that?" I could not tell if she was trying to get a reaction out of me or if she was genuinely curious. I remember staring at her, my fork frozen midair, a piece of toast hanging off it. I did not know what to say, so I just nodded, hoping she would drop it. But she kept going. With that same casual smile, she continued, "Maybe we should think about bringing someone else into the bedroom. You know, a threesome. It could be enlightening." I felt my face heat up, anger and shock bubbling up inside me. Was she serious? But there was a spark in her eye, a mix of challenge and excitement, that told me she was not kidding. I slammed my glass down a little harder than I meant to, water splashing over the sides. "Just don't," I said, barely holding back the growl in my voice. "Do not even think about it." Jessica barely reacted, just shrugged like it was nothing. "Fine, suit yourself," she muttered, then picked up her phone and started scrolling through her emails as if we had not just had a conversation that could upend everything. After that awkward exchange, I noticed a change in her. It was not just in the way she looked at me, it was in the little things she said and did. She began making small comments about being the one who made more money, as if she could not hold it in. At first it was subtle, a comment about picking up the tab at a restaurant or a joke around friends about being the breadwinner. But each jab cut deeper, becoming sharper each time. One night, while we were talking about future plans, she said, "Maybe I should just handle this, Brian. I mean, I am the one bringing in the real money." Her tone was almost mocking. I tried to laugh it off, even as resentment churned inside me. She had never thrown her success in my face like this before, but now it seemed to find its way into every conversation. I tried to convince myself she was just frustrated, maybe coping with the distance that had crept into our marriage. But what used to feel playful now felt hurtful, and I could not ignore it. The next day, I decided to do something to bring us back to what we once had. I wanted to show her that we did not need anyone else to make our marriage exciting. So, I planned a surprise, a dinner at the restaurant where we had our first date, followed by a night at a cozy little hotel nearby. I dropped the kids off with their grandma, who was thrilled to have them for the evening, and headed home, ready for a night of romance. As I walked through the door, full of hope, I called out for Jessica, expecting her to be waiting in the living room, maybe stretched out on the couch. But the house was quiet, too quiet. Then I heard it. Laughter, muffled voices, male voices, echoing from upstairs. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, my mind refusing to accept what I was hearing. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. But then I heard Jessica's voice blending with the others, and it felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. I stumbled up the stairs, dread settling deep in my gut. The bedroom door was locked. I twisted the doorknob so hard I half expected it to snap off in my hand. Just then, my brother Jason's bitter warning from years ago came flooding back. He had gone through 3 divorces, all of them ending in betrayal. Each time, he was blindsided, completely unaware of his wife's infidelity until it was too late. The last one nearly ruined him. He lost almost everything he had worked for, all because he could not prove she had cheated. In a dark, hollow voice that still haunts me, he had said, "Always get proof first. Without it, you have nothing. Without it, they'll take you for everything." Without a second thought, I turned from the door and made my way outside. I climbed the large tree that grew just outside our bedroom window, my heart pounding so hard it was almost painful. Branch by branch, I made my way up, each step making the dread twist tighter in my gut. Finally, I reached the balcony and saw them through the bedroom window. There, in the dim lighting, was Jessica. She was sprawled out on our bed, and she was not alone. 2 men, both muscular and completely naked, were with her. The sheets were tangled around their bodies, evidence of what had been going on, and Jessica looked absolutely immersed in the moment. Her skin was flushed with excitement, her hair splayed out across the pillow like a dark halo. She was laughing, her face alive with a raw, animalistic pleasure I had never seen before, her hands roaming freely over the men's chests, her fingers trailing down their bodies with a boldness that left no doubt about what was happening. I watched in horror as she leaned in close, pressing her lips to each of them, her hands gliding over their bare skin. Her words drifted through the air, barely audible but unmistakable. "God, you're so much better than I ever imagined. This is exactly what I needed." Hearing her say those words made something snap inside me. After all these years of being the one she could rely on, of being the steady presence in her life, she was here with these men, whispering things to them she had never said to me. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone, Jason's advice echoing in my mind. "Get proof first. Always get proof." Hating myself for even thinking it, I held up the phone, making sure to capture every single detail. Her flushed face, the expressions of the men, their hands exploring her body, all of it. I zoomed in to get Jessica's face clearly in the shot, her lips parted, eyes half closed in arousal. I documented everything, making sure the evidence was solid, indisputable. I wanted proof no one could deny, especially Jessica, who, as a skilled lawyer, knew exactly how to twist the truth to her advantage. The room felt like a scene from some explicit movie, one starring my own wife. She was whispering breathy words of encouragement, her voice intimate, filled with the kind of lust I had never heard directed at me. Every detail cut deep, and each photo was a punch to the gut, but I forced myself to keep going. My thumb fumbled over the record button, my pulse so loud it drowned out everything else. I made sure to get clear shots of their bodies intertwined, the unmistakable expressions of pleasure on her face and theirs, everything I would need to prove her betrayal beyond any doubt. After what felt like an eternity, I could not take it anymore. I shoved my phone into my pocket, letting out a breath I had been holding so long it felt like a release. My hands were trembling, and it took every ounce of control to keep myself from screaming. I climbed back down the tree, each step feeling heavier than the last. I stood on the ground for a moment, staring up at the window, thinking about everything we had built together, all the laughter, the late-night conversations, the dreams we had shared. And now, it was all unraveling, right before my eyes. I walked back inside the house, my feet feeling like they were made of lead, and headed straight to the garage. I needed a moment to think, to clear my head, to figure out what to do next. I sat in the car with the door open, breathing hard, my mind racing a mile a minute. Part of me wanted to burst back into the house, to confront her and those men right then and there, to make her face the pain she had caused. But another part of me, the part that remembered Jason's warning all too well, knew that if I wanted any kind of justice, I needed to be smart about this. This was no longer just about the marriage. It was about making sure she did not walk away unscathed, that she did not get to keep everything while I was left with nothing. Jessica had been throwing her financial power in my face lately, reminding me of her salary like it gave her some kind of immunity, like she was untouchable. It was all starting to make sense now, the little digs, the way she treated me like I was beneath her because I did not earn as much as she did. I took out my phone and looked through the photos, each one a brutal reminder of her betrayal, but I knew I needed them. I had to gather every shred of evidence, not just for myself, but for the fight I knew was coming. I had seen what happened to men who found themselves in my position, men who let their anger cloud their judgment, and ended up losing everything. Jessica thought she could do this to me, to our family, and walk away unscathed, because she earned more, because she held the power. But I was not going to let that happen. I dialed Jason's number, and he picked up on the second ring. Before he could say anything, I blurted out, "You were right, man. You were so damn right. And I need your help." There was a pause on the other end, then Jason spoke, his voice cautious, almost like he was afraid of what he might hear. "Tell me what happened, Brian." I laid it all out for him, every degrading detail, the men, the photos, the way Jessica had looked at them with that wild, uninhibited desire. By the time I was done, my voice was raw, cracking under the weight of it all. I heard Jason let out a deep breath on the other end of the line. "Jesus," he muttered. "I'm so sorry, man. I wish there was more I could say." I was taken aback, but I knew Jason had been dragged through this kind of nightmare more times than any man should. 3 divorces, each one leaving him worse off because he had been unprepared. His last ex-wife, in particular, had bled him dry after he caught her cheating with her personal trainer. She was clever, meticulous, and had hidden her tracks just enough that, when Jason tried to prove her infidelity, he came up empty-handed. No proof meant no leverage, and no leverage meant she walked away with almost everything. "I don't want to end up like you," I said, maybe harsher than I intended. "I don't want to lose everything just because I didn't play my cards right." "You won't," Jason replied, his voice hardening with that old, familiar fire. "This time you've got the proof. She won't know what hit her." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, all those years of bitterness and painful experience guiding him now, not just as my brother, but as a man who had learned these hard lessons. "First things first," he continued, "you need to gather everything. Not just the photos and videos, but every detail of your finances, every interaction she's had with these guys, bank statements, messages, phone records, everything. If she's been flaunting her income, she might be hiding money or even spending it on them. You need to know exactly what she's been up to." Jason's voice had this icy calm to it, like he was channeling all the rage and humiliation from his own past into this single mission to make sure I did not end up blindsided the way he had. I nodded, even though he could not see me, already making a mental list of everything I needed to do. "Listen, Brian," he said, his tone softening slightly. "I know you're hurt. I know you want to go in there, flip the bed, and scream at her. But you can't. Not yet. You need to keep your cool, like a poker face. She has to believe you don't know a thing. If she gets even a hint that you're on to her, she'll start covering her tracks, hiding her money, maybe moving assets around. Trust me, people like this always have a backup plan. I'm not letting her off that easy," I replied through gritted teeth. Just the thought of Jessica's smug expression, believing she could walk all over me just because she made more money, fueled my determination. "Good," Jason replied. "You've got to be smart about this. Stay calm, stay quiet, and most importantly, stay one step ahead of her." We talked a bit more, Jason laying out exactly what steps I needed to take. It was all cold, calculated strategy, no emotions, just hard tactics. He had been through this war, and he was not going to let me lose a battle he knew too well. The second we hung up, I got to work. I went to our home office and started digging, pulling out bank statements, going over Jessica's work expenses, logging into our joint accounts, looking for any sign that she had been funneling money or making unusual transactions. I printed out everything I could find, laying it all out on the dining room table like pieces of a puzzle starting to come together. That is when I saw it, several large transfers moving out of our account into another bank I did not recognize. It looked like Jessica had opened an account in her name only. The payments were marked as business expenses, but they did not match up with anything I knew about her work. A sick feeling twisted in my gut. Was she financing this affair right under my nose? I dug deeper, pulling out her phone records. Since Jessica and I had a family plan, I could see all the numbers she had been contacting. I scanned through the list, recognizing most of them: work calls, family, friends. But there was one number that appeared repeatedly, at all hours of the day and night: calls, texts, even spikes in data that suggested picture messages. I copied the number down and did a quick online search. It was unlisted, but I had a gut feeling it belonged to one of the men I had seen in that room, maybe even the main one. I saved it in my contacts under a name that reflected my hatred: Unknown Bastard. Next, I combed through Jessica's emails. Most were work-related, but buried deep in her archives, I found a few that raised red flags. They were hotel confirmations, room bookings that lined up perfectly with her so-called business trips. It felt like a ticking time bomb that had been planted in my life without my knowledge. By the time I finished gathering everything, my head was throbbing, my eyes strained from hours of staring at screens and papers. I had a thick stack of evidence now, a mountain of proof that Jessica was living a double life and playing me for a fool. But I was not done yet. I had one more task before the day was over. I went to Kinko's, just like Jason had advised. It was late, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the place nearly empty. I handed over a flash drive with the photos, documents, and records I had gathered and told the guy behind the counter to print it all out. Every last piece of it. He shot me a look that was somewhere between pity and surprise, but he did not ask questions. By the time he was finished, I had a thick stack of high-quality color prints in my hands, each one a visual punch to the gut. As I drove home, I kept running through my options, my mind turning over the best ways to deliver the blow. I thought about confronting Jessica with the photos right then, slamming them down in front of her, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. But Jason's voice echoed in my head. Not yet. Be smart. Be patient. I parked in the driveway and sat there in the dark, staring at the house I once thought was built on solid ground, only to realize it was rotting from within. I knew Jessica was inside, probably thinking she still had me wrapped around her finger, still convinced she was untouchable because she made more money and held the upper hand. My fist clenched around the steering wheel, my knuckles going white as the anger surged through me. I was ready to tear down the life she had destroyed. But I knew I had to play my part first, quiet, composed, like I did not have a clue, just the fool she believed me to be. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked into the house, forcing a calm I did not feel. Showtime. I could barely feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I walked into the house. Jessica was in the kitchen, casually chopping vegetables for dinner, as if it were just another evening. She didn't even look up when I entered, just threw a quick smile my way and said, "Hey, you're home early." I bit back the urge to grab her by the shoulders and confront her right then. I had just spent the last few hours watching my entire life unravel, and here she was, playing house like nothing was wrong. I could still picture her tangled in those sheets, hear her breathless laughter, feel the weight of those men's hands on her skin. But I swallowed it all down and forced a smile, one that never reached my eyes. "Yeah, finished up at the office early," I replied, setting my keys on the counter as casually as I could. "Thought I'd come home and surprise you." Her eyes flicked to mine for just a moment, something wary crossing her gaze before she masked it with a practiced smile. "Surprise me, huh? Well, that's a nice change." There was a hint of sarcasm in her voice, a jab I did not miss. My jaw clenched so tightly it ached, but I kept my tone light. "Thought we could have a quiet night together, you know, just us." She nodded, but I could see the tension in her. Maybe it was something in my expression, Or maybe she was already beginning to feel the walls close in. Either way, I could see the wheels turning behind those sharp green eyes of hers, calculating her next move. "Sounds good," she said, her voice softer now. "I could use a quiet night after the day I had." "Oh, really?" I asked, leaning against the counter and trying to sound curious instead of bitter. "Busy day at work?" Jessica's hand paused over the cutting board for just a moment, the knife hovering mid-air. Then she flashed another smile, but this one looked strained, almost like a mask slipping. "Yeah, lots of calls, meetings, you know how it is," she said, not quite meeting my gaze. "I've been running around all day." I nodded, pretending to buy her lie. "Must be exhausting," I replied, the words nearly choking me. "All that running around." She did not flinch, just kept chopping, but I noticed it, a tiny twitch in her jaw, the smallest crack in her polished demeanor. She was lying, and she knew I knew, but she was too confident to think I could ever prove it. The scent of dinner filled the kitchen, and for a painful moment, everything felt normal. I stared at her, really looked at her. This woman who used to be my best friend, my partner, the person I thought I knew better than anyone. Now, all I saw was a stranger wearing my wife's face. "By the way," she said, not glancing up, "I was thinking we should talk about those investments I mentioned. Since you've been working so hard, maybe we should let my income handle the more serious expenses. It just makes more sense, don't you think?" There it was again, that jab, that reminder that she was the one with the bigger paycheck, that somehow I was lesser because of it. Before today, that comment would have stung. It might have even made me doubt myself. But now, all it did was fuel the fire burning in my chest. "Sure, whatever you think is best," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I'm just here to keep things running smoothly." She glanced up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she were trying to read my thoughts, to figure out why I was not reacting the way I usually did. For a split second, I wondered if she could sense the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior, if she could tell that everything was about to change. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She reached for it without thinking, but I caught the flash of panic in her eyes when she glanced at the screen. She turned the phone face down a second too late, and I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen, Nick, along with a profile photo. My stomach turned. Nick was one of the men from the photos, the guy with broad shoulders and a smug expression I would not forget. "Who's that?" I asked, nodding toward the phone, keeping my tone casual. "Oh, just a work thing," she replied, a bit too quickly, her smile tightening. "Nothing important." I felt my jaw clench, but I forced myself to nod as though I believed her. "Work thing, huh? Must be important to text you this late." Jessica gave a nervous laugh, but I noticed something sharper in her eyes now, like she was sizing me up, trying to gauge what I knew. "Yeah, well, you know how clients can be," she said, brushing it off. "They're always needy." "Yeah," I replied, not breaking eye contact. "I'm sure they are." I could see it now, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the way she was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, I was not the fool she had been taking me for. I knew I had to keep up the act, to play my part perfectly until she was cornered with no way out. I wanted to see just how far she was willing to take this, how deep she was in her own web of lies. So, when her phone buzzed again, I let it go without saying a word, just wore that fake, pleasant smile I had perfected today. "Listen," I said, forcing myself to appear relaxed. "Why don't you go ahead and answer that? I'll finish up here." She looked at me, her eyes scanning my face for any hint of what I was really thinking. After a moment, she nodded, muttering something about work, and left the kitchen with her phone in hand. I watched her go, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum, every muscle in my body tense for the battle that was still to come. As soon as she was out of sight, I pulled out my own phone and checked the security camera footage I had set up just before walking into the house. There she was, sneaking glances at her screen, her fingers flying over the keyboard, her lips curling into a smile, the kind she used to give only to me. She thought she was so clever, thought she was keeping this hidden. But the camera had captured everything, every message, every smile, every dirty little secret she thought she could hide. And now, I had it all. I had the proof. Jessica thought she could outsmart me, play me like I was some naive fool, but she had no idea that I had already set the trap, and she was walking right into it. This was not just about catching her in the act, it was about making her feel every ounce of the betrayal she had put me through. When I was done, when the dust finally settled, she would know exactly what it meant to lose everything. I had to bide my time a little longer, let her believe she was in control, still calling the shots. But when the moment was right, I would pull the rug out from under her and watch her whole world collapse. The morning I left the house with the evidence in hand, I knew there was no turning back. I had everything I needed, the pictures, the messages, undeniable proof of Jessica's betrayal. The calm mask I had worn around her was gone now, replaced by something colder, something that no longer cared about keeping up appearances. I was finished being the fool. It was time to take my revenge. I drove straight to the same Kinko's I had been to the night before, but this time, there was no hesitation. I walked right up, handed over the flash drive, and told the guy behind the counter to print as many copies as the machine could handle. He looked at me like he had seen a ghost, his eyes darting down to the images on the screen, but he kept silent, probably figuring it was best not to get involved. When he handed me the stack of photos, I took a grim satisfaction in flipping through them, my stomach twisting with a mixture of anger and strange relief. There was Jessica, sprawled across the bed, her face showing unmistakable pleasure as she wrapped herself around those men. Their faces were clear, the betrayal was laid out in damning detail. I could see through every lie, every deception she had made me believe, that somehow I was at fault while she was living out her fantasies behind my back. I paid for the prints without a second thought and left the store, feeling the weight of those pictures like a promise of revenge. From there, I drove directly to her office, the sleek, towering building downtown that she loved to flaunt. Jessica was so proud of her career, the title she had fought tooth and nail to earn, and the money that came with it. Today, I was going to tear it all down. Parking a block away, my heart raced with a strange blend of nerves and satisfaction. I marched up to the massive glass doors at the entrance, not even pausing to think twice. I pulled out those incriminating photos and one by one, superglued them to the door, each image more revealing than the last. I made sure they were positioned perfectly, right at eye level so that every single person entering or leaving would see them. The glue dried fast and solid, no one would be able to pull them down without a struggle. But I was not done, not by a long shot. I walked straight into the lobby, ignoring the stunned receptionist who tried to ask, "Can I help you?" before her eyes landed on the stack of photos in my hand. I barely noticed her, my focus was fixed solely on my target. I knew exactly where Jessica's office was, that glass-walled corner suite she bragged about, where she held meetings, closed deals, built her little empire. I strode down the marble-floored hallway, my shoes echoing with each step, people glancing over and whispering when they saw the photos I carried. I did not care. Let them look. Let them see the real Jessica. When I reached her office, I plastered the walls with those pictures. I covered every surface with the evidence of her deceit, her desk, her chair, even the framed family photos she had displayed on the shelves. By the time I was finished, her office looked like a twisted gallery of her own downfall. As a final touch, I took the remaining copies and addressed them to her most important clients, marking each envelope with "Personal and confidential." These were the people who trusted her, who gave her those big accounts she loved to brag about. Soon, they would know exactly what kind of person they had been dealing with. I left her office, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, but this time it was not from fear or anger. It was from a deep, cold satisfaction, the knowledge that I had done what needed to be done. I had hit her where it would hurt the most, her career, her pride, the image she had built of herself as this perfect, powerful woman. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within hours, the calls started coming. First, Jessica herself, her voice a mix of shock and fury, demanding to know what I had done, how I could humiliate her like that. She screamed at me, calling me insane, insisting I had gone too far. But all I could do was laugh, a bitter, cold laugh with no trace of the love I once felt for her. "You ruined your own life," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. "I just made sure everyone else saw it for what it really is." Then came the calls from her workplace, her bosses, her colleagues, all scrambling to do damage control on the chaos I had unleashed. I heard they closed off the building's entrance, tearing down those photos as fast as they could. But it was too late, the damage was done. Her reputation was shattered, her career in ruins. Jessica's world came crashing down in a way she never saw coming. She was called into a meeting with the higher-ups, her face pale and drawn as they laid out the evidence in front of her, the clear proof of her deceit. I was not there to witness it, but I could imagine the look on Jessica's face as her composure crumbled, realizing there was no talking her way out of this one. By the end of the day, she was suspended from her position, pending a full investigation. Her clients began pulling out, one by one, eager to distance themselves from the scandal that was now her life. The career she had spent years building was slipping right through her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Sitting in my car outside her office, I watched the chaos unfold, the shocked expressions, the murmurs of disbelief as people came and went. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of control. Jessica had tried to break me, belittle me, make me feel like I was nothing. But now, she knew the truth. Now, the world knew who she really was. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the power she thought she held over me, about ensuring she never looked at me as if I were beneath her again. When Jessica finally walked out of that building, her head down and her face drained of its usual confidence, I knew that, no matter what came next, I had already won. Watching her walk away that day, shattered and defeated, I knew there was only one thing left to do, the final step to reclaim my life and close this chapter for good: filing for divorce. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, even before I discovered her affair. There were nights I had wondered what it might feel like to tell her I was done, to walk away from a life that had turned into a lie. But now, it was no longer a thought. It was my reality, and I was ready to turn the page. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, the same one my brother had recommended, a guy named Robert with a reputation for handling even the trickiest cases. As I walked in, Robert looked up from behind his desk with a knowing smile, as though he already sensed the storm I was about to unleash. "Brian," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Good to see you. I hear you've been busy." "You could say that," I replied, sitting down and placing the stack of photos and evidence on his desk. "I need to file for divorce, and I want this to be as thorough as possible." Robert took a closer look at the photos, his expression calm and professional, showing no surprise as he examined the evidence. He was well aware that Jessica was an attorney herself, likely familiar with every loophole she could use to shield herself. But he had seen enough cases like mine to know exactly how to sidestep the tricks and close any potential gaps. "You have done your homework," he said, nodding with approval. "This will help us immensely. And given her background, I'll make sure we approach this airtight. The more evidence, the stronger our case." "I want full custody of the kids," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I want to make sure Jessica doesn't get a penny more than she deserves. She tried to humiliate me, to tear me down. I want her to understand that she's the one who's going to lose everything." Robert raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "I like your approach, Brian. Most men in your situation just want a clean break, but you're looking to leave a mark. I respect that. It's not just about hurting her," I replied, though I knew there was a part of me that could not deny it. "It's about taking back control. She made me feel powerless, like I was some fool she could manipulate and discard. I'm done feeling like that." Robert nodded, leaning forward with a steely glint in his eyes. "Then we will make sure she knows exactly what she's losing. I'll draft the papers today, and we'll serve them to her as soon as possible. Given the circumstances, I am confident we can aim for a favorable settlement in your favor. The evidence we have is solid, and will leave no room for her to twist this." He outlined the legal steps, the strategy to strike Jessica where it would hurt the most. He explained the process of dividing assets, freezing accounts, and protecting myself from any financial tricks she might attempt. I listened carefully, absorbing his words like a blueprint for the life I was about to build, a life where I finally came out on top. When I left Robert's office, the divorce papers freshly printed and ready to be served, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a strange clarity, as though a fog had lifted, and I could finally see the road ahead. It was rough, uneven, but for the first time, it was clear. Back home, I sat in the living room, those papers in my hand, staring at them like they were the key to a cage I had been trapped in for years. I imagined the look on Jessica's face when she saw them, the shock, the realization that she had finally lost control. I wanted her to feel the betrayal, the rage, the helplessness that had consumed me when I found out about her infidelity. This was not just about ending a marriage. It was about tearing down the life she had built on lies and deceit. Jessica came home late that night, her eyes red and swollen, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the day's events. She walked into the living room, saw me sitting there with the divorce papers, and stopped cold. For a moment, we just stared at each other, her, broken and defeated, me, calm and resolute. "Brian," she started, her voice cracking. "We need to talk." "You're right," I replied, matching her gaze, my voice steady with the finality of what was to come. My voice was cold, controlled. I stood up slowly, holding the divorce papers between us like a shield. "We do need to talk about this." I thrust the papers into her hands, and she stared down at them, her face twisting in shock and disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed, as if she were searching for the right words but could not find them. I watched her fingers tremble as she flipped through the pages, her eyes skimming over the cold legal language that laid out the end of our marriage. "You're divorcing me?" she whispered, like she could not believe it was real. "After everything we've been through, you're really going to do this?" "You did this," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "You're the one who threw everything away the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you, the moment you brought strangers into our bed. Don't you dare act like this is some kind of surprise." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I did not feel a single ounce of sympathy, not anymore. I had spent too many nights lying awake, wondering what I had done wrong, trying to fix something that had been broken beyond repair. This was her mess, her betrayal, and now she had to face the consequences. "Brian, please," she said, her voice cracking, tears now streaming down her face. "I was stupid, okay? I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far. We can fix this, we can go to counseling or—" "Stop." I held up my hand, cutting her off. "Just stop, Jessica. This isn't something we can fix. You destroyed any chance we had the moment you decided I was just another pawn in your little game. And now you're going to pay for it." She looked at me, desperation in her eyes turning to something else, anger, maybe even defiance. "You think this makes you the bigger person, Brian? Humiliating me in front of my colleagues, my clients, destroying my career? You think you've won?" I leaned in close, my eyes locked on hers, my voice low and steady. "This isn't about being the bigger person, Jessica. This is about making sure you never forget what you did to me, what you threw away. You thought you could break me, but I'm still standing. And now I'll walk away with my head held high, knowing that you're the one left with nothing." She stood there shaking, her face twisted in a mix of rage and defeat. I saw the realization wash over her, that there was no coming back from this. She had gambled everything and lost. Turning my back on her, I walked out of the room, leaving her clutching the divorce papers like they were the remains of a life she had once thought was unbreakable. This was not just an ending, it was a reckoning, the beginning of a new chapter where I took back the control she had tried to rip from my hands. After I handed her those divorce papers, I knew I had taken back a part of my power, but I was not done. This was not just about ending a marriage. It was about watching Jessica's entire world crumble the way mine had. I wanted her to understand what betrayal really looked like when served cold. The days following were surreal. Jessica drifted around the house like a ghost, her eyes hollow, her face pale. She tried to talk to me a few times, desperate to apologize, to explain, to beg for another chance. But each time she opened her mouth, all I could see was the woman I had caught with other men, as if our vows had never meant a thing. I did not scream at her. I did not engage. I stayed calm, cold, detached, giving her nothing but silence, and that silence spoke louder than any words. It told her that the Brian she once knew was gone, replaced by someone who could no longer be manipulated or guilt-tripped into forgiveness. Then the day came we both knew was inevitable, the day the lawyers called us in to finalize the divorce. Robert had prepared everything, every document lined up with precision. Jessica arrived looking like she had not slept in days, her once perfect hair now tangled, her designer clothes wrinkled. The confident, powerful woman who used to stride into these meetings with her head held high was gone, replaced by someone barely holding it together. We sat across from each other in the sterile conference room, a thick silence hanging between us, heavy with everything left unsaid. Her lawyer, a polished man who quickly realized he had drawn the short straw, kept glancing at Jessica, like he wished he could fix this. But he knew there was no fixing what she had done. Robert went through the terms, his voice steady and businesslike, outlining the division of assets, financial statements, and the custody arrangements for our kids. Jessica flinched when she heard that I would be getting full custody. She opened her mouth to protest but stopped herself, knowing that battle was already lost. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, suggesting mediation for the kids' sake, but Robert shut him down at every turn, ice-cold and unwavering. My client has provided irrefutable evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct, he said, his eyes never leaving Jessica's. He is being more than fair in allowing a settlement that does not strip her of everything. But let's be clear, there will be no negotiation. I watched Jessica's face as she took it all in, her eyes filling with tears, her hands trembling as if she were trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw real fear in her eyes, not just fear of losing me, but of losing the life she thought she had under control. "Brian," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please." "Stop," I said, cutting her off, my voice cold and emotionless, like I was speaking to a stranger. "You do not get to beg me for anything anymore. You made your choices, Jessica. You lied, you cheated, and you treated me like I was nothing. Now you live with the consequences." Her lips quivered, and the tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said, almost too softly to hear. "I'm so sorry. I never thought it would end like this." I looked her dead in the eyes, my face unreadable. "Neither did I," I said quietly. "But here we are." She slumped back into her chair, defeated, her hands dropping into her lap. The once powerful woman who had dominated our home and marriage was now just a shell. All the arrogance, all the superiority she had wielded over me because she earned more, was gone. She was not better than me. She never had been. As the lawyers finalized the details, she looked at me one last time, as if searching for some hint of the man she used to know. But that man was already gone. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and walked out without a backward glance. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, cutting through the numbness that had gripped me for so long. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs and clear my head. I had walked into that building as a man who had once loved Jessica with everything I had. I walked out as someone who understood the strength in letting go. The divorce was final. The marriage I had once thought would last a lifetime was over. But more importantly, the lie she had built around us was destroyed. There were no more secrets, no more shadows. I went home to the house that was now truly mine. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something other than rage or sadness. I felt peace, the kind that comes from realizing you have survived the worst and come out stronger than you ever thought possible. I took down the pictures from the bedroom, the ones of us smiling, pretending to be happy in moments that now felt like another lifetime. I packed them into a box, shoving it into the back of the closet, out of sight, out of mind. As I stood in the quiet of that empty house, I knew that this was the real victory. Not the destruction of Jessica's career, not the fallout from her affair, but the fact that I was still standing, that I had refused to let her turn me into a victim. My phone buzzed, a message from my brother Jason. Proud of you, man. You did it. I stared at his words, letting them sink in. I had done it. I had taken back my life. And maybe, just maybe, I was no longer afraid of what came next. Whatever the future held, I knew one thing for certain. I would face it on my own terms, with my head held high, unbroken and unafraid.
What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.
Bye bye.